The fiancé publicly accused the maid of poisoning the family. Then the billionaire revealed the real culprit. Nobody in that dining room thought a simple dinner would end with police lights flashing outside a mansion gate. One moment, laughter. The next, a woman clutching her throat, a glass shattering on marble floors, and a young maid frozen in fear as every eye in the room turned on her. The fiancée pointed her finger and screamed one word: poison. But what nobody knew that night was that the real monster in that house had been sitting at the table the entire time, smiling, sipping wine, waiting. Welcome back, friends. Before we start, tell me, what country are you watching from tonight? Type it below. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. Tonight's story is one of the most emotional ones we've ever told. It's about loyalty, betrayal, and a secret so well hidden that it took a billionaire's entire fortune and his broken heart to finally uncover it. If you believe the truth always finds a way to the surface, stay with me. This story might change the way you see the people closest to you. Sofia Reyes had learned a long time ago that some houses feel like prisons no matter how beautiful they are. The Cole estate sat on top of a hill outside Charleston, with white columns, endless gardens, and a view of the ocean that looked like something out of a postcard. Sofia had worked there for almost 2 years, ever since she turned 24, cleaning floors that cost more than her mother's entire house back in Georgia, folding shirts that cost more than her monthly rent. She was 26 now, quiet, careful, and used to being invisible. Invisible was safer. Invisible meant nobody noticed the girl who refilled the water glasses, who folded the towels just right, who remembered that old Mrs. Cole liked her tea with exactly 1 spoon of honey, never 2. Invisible meant nobody asked questions about the mother Sofia was supporting back home, or the little brother in college whose tuition she quietly helped pay every semester with money she barely had. But lately, invisible had become harder. Because lately, Damien Cole had started noticing her. Damien was 34, the kind of man magazines love to photograph. Sharp jaw, tired eyes, a company worth more money than Sofia could imagine even trying to count. He had inherited Cole Industries from his father 5 years ago, and in that time, he had doubled its value, buried his grief in work, and slowly turned into someone the newspapers called ruthless and brilliant in the same sentence. At home, though, Damien was quieter, sadder, in a way people didn't expect from a man who owned half of downtown Charleston. His mother, Eleanor Cole, had been sick for the last year, her heart weak, her body tired. Damien visited her every single morning before work, sitting by her bed, holding her hand like he was still a little boy afraid of losing her. Sofia had watched him do that for months. She had watched him hide his exhaustion behind expensive suits. And somewhere in those quiet mornings, without meaning to, she had started to care about him. Not because he was rich. Because he was human, in a house full of people who had forgotten how to be. The only problem was Victoria Hartwell. Victoria was 28, elegant, magazine perfect, and engaged to Damien for the last 8 months. She came from old Charleston money herself, the kind of family that measured people by their last names and their bank accounts. Victoria was smart. She was beautiful. And she had a way of looking at Sofia that made the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. "Make sure the good silverware is out tonight," Victoria said one afternoon, not looking up from her phone as Sofia dusted the hallway mirror. "My parents are coming for dinner. I don't want any embarrassing mistakes." "Yes, ma'am," Sofia said softly. Victoria finally looked at her then, her eyes sliding over Sofia's uniform, her tired face, the calluses on her hands. "You know," she said almost thoughtfully, "Damien mentioned you the other day. Said you remembered his mother's medication schedule better than the nurse does." Sofia's stomach tightened. "I just pay attention, ma'am." Victoria said. "Pay attention to your job. That's all I ask." It wasn't cruelty, not yet. It was warning. And Sofia, who had survived worse than cold words from rich women, simply nodded and kept working. That night, the dinner Victoria had been preparing for weeks finally happened. The dining room glowed with candlelight. Eleanor Cole, wrapped in a soft blue shawl, sat at the head of the table, looking frail but happy to have her family around her. Damien sat beside his mother, and Victoria sat across from him, glowing in a green dress, her parents beside her, laughing at some story about their vacation in Europe. Sophia moved quietly around the table, refilling glasses, bringing out each course exactly as instructed. She had helped the cook prepare the meal herself, a rich seafood stew that Eleanor had specifically requested, one of the few things her weak stomach could still enjoy. Everything was fine. Everything was normal. And then, halfway through dessert, Eleanor Cole began to cough. At first, nobody worried. An old woman coughing at dinner wasn't unusual. But then her coughing turned into gasping, her hand flying to her throat, her face turning a shade of gray that made every person at that table freeze in horror. "Mom." Damien's chair scraped back, so hard it fell over. "Mom." Victoria's father stood up too fast, knocking over his wine glass, the red liquid spreading across the white tablecloth like blood. Victoria's mother screamed. And in the chaos, in the panic, in the terrifying seconds where nobody knew what was happening, Victoria's eyes found Sophia standing frozen by the kitchen door with an empty serving tray in her hands. "It was her," Victoria said, her voice rising, pointing across the room. "She poisoned her. She poisoned Eleanor." I want you to imagine, for a moment, being 26 years old, standing in a room full of powerful people, watching an old woman you genuinely love struggle to breathe, and then hearing someone accuse you, in front of everyone, of trying to kill her. What would you have done in Sophia's place? The room went completely silent, except for Eleanor's ragged breathing and the sound of Damien's phone as he dialed for an ambulance with shaking hands. And Sophia stood there, the tray falling from her fingers, understanding, for the very first time, that her quiet, invisible life was about to be destroyed. The ambulance arrived within 12 minutes, though to Sophia it felt like 12 hours. Eleanor was rushed to Charleston General, her frail body strapped to a stretcher, an oxygen mask over her face, Damien gripping her hand the entire way, refusing to let go even as paramedics tried to work around him. Victoria rode in the car behind the ambulance with her parents, her face pale but her voice, once she had her phone out, sharp and certain. "I saw her," Victoria told the responding police officer, standing in the driveway of the Cole estate while Sophia was questioned separately near the kitchen entrance. "The maid. She's the only one who touched Eleanor's food before it went to the table. She's been getting too close to this family. I've had a bad feeling about her for weeks." The officer, a tired man named Detective Marsh, wrote it all down without much expression. He'd seen plenty of rich families accuse plenty of poor employees over the years. Sometimes they were right. Often they weren't. "Ma'am," Detective Marsh said to Sophia, "did you prepare Mrs. Cole's food tonight?" "I helped," Sophia said, her voice shaking. "But I didn't. I would never." "She had access," Victoria interrupted, appearing in the doorway with her arms crossed. "She had access, and she has motive. Everyone in this house knows she's been trying to worm her way into this family's good graces for months." "That's not true," Sophia whispered, tears finally slipping down her cheeks. "I care about Mrs. Cole. I would never hurt her." But in that moment, her words meant nothing against Victoria's confidence, against the weight of the Hartwell name, against the simple, terrible math of the situation. A rich family's matriarch had nearly died, and a poor maid had been standing closest to the food. By morning, the story had already reached the local news. Charleston housekeeper under investigation after society matriarch poisoned at family dinner. One headline read, "Sophia's photo, taken from an old employment badge, was splashed across websites within hours." People who had never met her filled comment sections with hatred, calling her things that made her physically sick to read. Her mother called from Georgia, crying, asking if it was true, if her daughter had really done something so terrible. "No, Mama," Sophia said, sitting alone in her small apartment, unable to stop shaking. "I didn't do anything. I swear to you I didn't." Meanwhile, at Charleston General, Eleanor Cole remained in stable but critical condition. Doctors confirmed she had ingested a toxic substance, something in her food that had triggered a severe reaction in her already weakened heart. Damien sat outside the ICU for 2 days straight, barely eating, barely sleeping, his mind replaying the moment his mother had started gasping for air over and over again. Victoria stayed by his side through all of it, holding his hand, bringing him coffee, whispering comforting words. To anyone watching, she looked like the perfect fiancée, devoted, strong, exactly the kind of partner a man in crisis needed.
But there were small things.
Things only someone paying very close attention would notice. The way Victoria checked her phone constantly, stepping into hallways to take calls she never explained. The way she seemed almost relieved, for just a flicker of a second, whenever the police mentioned Sophia's name during their updates. The way she pushed, again and again, for the investigation to move faster, for Sophia to be formally charged, for the case to be closed so this family can finally heal. She's already been suspended without pay, Damien said quietly one evening, sitting in the hospital cafeteria, exhaustion carved into every line of his face. Isn't that enough for now, Victoria? We don't even know for certain, Damien. Victoria's voice was gentle, but firm, the way you'd speak to a child who didn't understand something obvious. Your mother almost died. I saw that girl standing there with the tray. Why are you defending her? I'm not defending anyone, Damien said. I just want the truth. Victoria smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. The truth is right in front of you. Damien didn't answer. Something about the certainty in her voice, the speed of it all, sat wrong in his stomach, though he couldn't yet explain why. 3 days later, Eleanor Cole woke up. She was weak, her voice barely above a whisper, but she was alive, and the relief that washed over Damien nearly brought him to his knees. He held her hand, tears finally falling freely down his face, the first tears he had allowed himself since that terrible night. Damien, Eleanor rasped, her eyes struggling to focus on her son's face. The girl, Sophia. Is she all right? Damien blinked, confused. Mom, she's the one they think. No, Eleanor whispered, gripping his hand with surprising strength.
No, baby.
Listen to me.
Before I got sick, I saw something.
I need to tell you what I saw. And right then, right as Eleanor tried to speak the words that might change everything, a nurse rushed in, alarms beeping, Eleanor's monitor spiking dangerously, her body suddenly convulsing on the hospital bed. Doctors flooded the room, shouting for Damien to step back, pushing him into the hallway as the door slammed shut behind them. What had his mother seen? And why, the moment she tried to speak it aloud, had her body betrayed her again? The doctors stabilized Eleanor within the hour, but she slipped into a deep, medicated sleep, too weak to speak again that night. Damien stood outside her room for a long time, his hands pressed against the glass, his mind racing through every word his mother had managed to say. Before I got sick, I saw something. Something. Not someone's name. Not a clear accusation. Just enough to plant a seed of doubt that grew heavier in Damien's chest with every passing hour. He thought about Sophia, the quiet, careful way she moved through his house, the gentle patience she'd always shown his mother, the way Eleanor had specifically asked about her, worried about her, even while fighting for her own life. That wasn't a reaction of a woman who believed her caretaker had tried to kill her. Damien made a decision that night that would change everything. He hired a private investigator. Not the police, not yet. He didn't trust that the official investigation, already leaning so heavily on Victoria's confident accusations, would look anywhere else. He needed someone who would dig quietly, carefully, and without bias. The investigator, a sharp former detective named Raymond Cho, started with the basics. Who had access to Eleanor's food that night? Who had opportunity? And, more importantly, who had motive? Sophia, as it turned out, had almost nothing to gain from harming Eleanor Cole. She'd lose her job, her income, the small stability she had built for her family back in Georgia. Raymond's early digging found a woman who sent money home every month, who had no debts, no secret grudges, no history of any kind of instability. If anything, Eleanor's death would have devastated Sophia far more than it would have helped her. Victoria Hartwell was a different story entirely. Raymond found it almost by accident, buried in financial records that took days to properly untangle. The Hartwell family, once one of the wealthiest names in Charleston, had quietly lost most of their fortune over the last 3 years. Bad investments, a failed hotel venture, mounting debts hidden carefully behind a lifestyle they could no longer actually afford. Victoria's engagement to Damian Cole wasn't just a love story to the outside world. It was, to her parents at least, a financial rescue plan. But there was something else. Something that made Raymond's stomach turn cold as he read through old emails Victoria had carelessly left connected on a shared family computer, the kind rich households sometimes forget to properly secure. Eleanor Cole hated Victoria. Quietly, privately, Eleanor had never trusted her son's fiancé. She'd hired her own small investigation months earlier, nothing as thorough as Raymond's, but enough to uncover whispers of the Hartwell family's financial collapse. Eleanor had been planning, slowly and carefully, to convince Damian to delay the wedding, to protect the family fortune with a prenuptial agreement so ironclad that Victoria would gain almost nothing if the marriage ever ended. Victoria had found out. An email, sent from Eleanor's private account to her lawyer just 2 weeks before the poisoning, outlined exactly that plan. And in the deleted folder of a laptop Victoria had once borrowed from the estate's shared office, Raymond found a search history that made his blood run cold. Searches about heart medication interactions, about substances that could trigger cardiac events in elderly patients with weak hearts, about symptoms that would look like natural illness rather than deliberate harm. Damian sat across from Raymond in his office, staring at the printed pages laid out on the desk between them, feeling like the floor had disappeared beneath his feet. "This doesn't prove she did it," Raymond said carefully. "It proves she had a motive, and it proves she was looking into ways to make someone sick without it looking intentional. But we need more than that before we go public with any of this." Damian's hands were shaking. Everything he thought he knew about the last 8 months of his life, every quiet dinner, every soft word, every moment he thought Victoria loved him, suddenly felt like a performance he'd been too blind, too grieving, too distracted to see through. And meanwhile, across town, Sophia sat in a small courtroom waiting area, her lawyer, a young public defender doing her best on an overwhelming caseload, telling her gently that the district attorney's office was preparing to formally file charges within the week. "They don't have physical evidence tying you directly to the poison," the lawyer explained. "But the accusation, the witness statement from Ms. Hartwell, the media pressure, it's enough for them to move forward unless something changes." Sophia nodded numbly, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. She thought about her mother back in Georgia, about her little brother's tuition payments that would now stop, about the life she had worked so hard to build slowly collapsing because of a truth someone else was determined to hide. What would you do, in that moment, knowing the world had already decided you were guilty? That night, Damian showed up at Sophia's apartment for the first time in his life, standing awkwardly in a hallway that smelled like someone else's cooking, holding the printed pages Raymond had given him. "I need to ask you something," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion and something that might have been shame. "And I need you to tell me the truth." Sophia opened the door wider, her heart pounding, uncertain if this visit meant her rescue or her final downfall. "I know you didn't do it," Damian said, before Sophia could even speak. "I should have said that days ago. I'm sorry it took me this long." Sophia's legs nearly gave out beneath her. She gripped the doorframe, tears rushing to her eyes so fast she couldn't stop them. "You believe me?" "I do," Damian said. "And I think I know who did." He stepped inside, and for the next hour, he laid everything out: the Hartwell family's hidden debts, Eleanor's secret plan for a stronger prenuptial agreement, the searches found on Victoria's laptop, the timeline that all pointed toward a devastating, calculated truth. Sophia listened in stunned silence, her hands pressed over her mouth, understanding for the first time just how close she had come to losing everything for a crime someone else had committed. "Why me, though?" Sophia finally whispered. "Why did she choose to blame me specifically?" Damian's jaw tightened. "Because you were convenient. And because..." He paused, something painful crossing his face. "Because she noticed the way I looked at you before I even let myself notice it." I think some part of her wanted you gone regardless of what happened to my mother. The poisoning just gave her the perfect excuse. Sophia's cheeks flushed, grief and confusion, and something warmer all tangled together inside her chest. There wasn't time to sit with that feeling, though. Not yet. The next morning, Damien called a meeting. He didn't go to the police first. He went home, to the estate, where Victoria was waiting, having heard that Eleanor was awake and improving. She greeted Damien with a relieved smile, reaching for his hands, and for a moment, Damien almost faltered, almost let himself pretend none of it was true. I spoke with my mother's doctors, Damien said instead, watching Victoria's face carefully. They're running additional toxicology tests, more detailed ones. The kind that can identify exactly which substance was used and how it entered her system. Something flickered behind Victoria's eyes, so fast, so small, that a man less desperate for the truth might have missed it entirely. That's good, Victoria said carefully. The sooner we know for certain, the sooner that Maid can be properly charged. Funny thing about detailed tests, Damien continued, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. They also check for search histories on shared devices in the house, medication interactions, cardiac triggers, that kind of thing. Victoria's hand slipped from his. Damien, what are you saying? I'm saying, Damien said, finally letting the anger crack through, that my mother found out about your family's debts. She was going to protect our fortune with a prenup you couldn't touch. And 2 weeks later, she nearly died at our dinner table. You can't possibly believe. Victoria's voice rose, panic edging into every word. I love you, Damien. I would never hurt your mother. I would never hurt anyone. Then explain the search history, Damien said quietly. Explain why you were so certain it was Sophia within seconds of my mother collapsing, before anyone had any evidence at all. Explain why you've spent every single day since then pushing so hard for her arrest instead of pushing for the truth. Victoria's carefully constructed composure finally shattered. She didn't confess outright, not completely, not in the way movies make it look clean and simple. Instead, she cried and screamed and accused Damien of betraying her, of choosing the help over the woman who loved him, of being manipulated by a maid who had clearly seduced her way into his sympathy. But underneath the noise, underneath the desperate anger, Damien saw something he recognized immediately because he'd seen it on his own face in the mirror plenty of times over the last difficult year. The look of someone caught, someone cornered, someone who knew the truth had finally arrived at their door. The detailed toxicology results came back 4 days later, along with a full digital forensics report from Raymond's team. Traces of a rare heart medication, one prescribed to Victoria's own grandmother, had been found mixed into the seafood stew seasoning, the exact stage of preparation Victoria had personally helped with that evening, insisting to the cook that she wanted to add a special family recipe touch to honor Eleanor. It was enough. More than enough. Detective Marsh, the same tired officer who had once written down Victoria's confident accusations without question, now sat across from her in a very different kind of interview room, watching a very different kind of composure crumble entirely. Sophia, meanwhile, sat beside Eleanor Cole's hospital bed, holding the older woman's hand as Eleanor, finally strong enough to speak clearly, looked at her with tired, grateful eyes. I tried to tell my son, Eleanor whispered. That night I woke up. I saw her, in the kitchen, adding something to the pot when she thought no one was watching. I just didn't get the chance to say her name before my heart gave out again. Sophia squeezed her hand gently. You're safe now, she said. That's all that matters. Outside in the hallway, Damien stood watching them through the window, his chest tight with an emotion he couldn't fully name, relief and grief, and something warmer, something that had been quietly growing for months, finally allowed to breathe. If you were Damien, watching the woman you almost married get arrested, and the woman you wrongly let suffer finally get proven innocent, how do you think you'd feel in that moment? Victoria Hartwell was formally charged 3 weeks later with attempted murder and endangerment. Her family's collapsing finances, once a private embarrassment, became public record during the trial, laid bare alongside the calculated, desperate choice their daughter had made to protect a lifestyle that had already quietly crumbled beneath them. She did not go to prison forever. The court eventually settled on a lengthy sentence, reduced somewhat by her lawyer's argument that she'd acted in a moment of panic rather than premeditated malice, though the toxicology evidence and the search history told a more calculated story than her defense wanted to admit. Either way, the life Victoria had built, the engagement, the Hartwell name's remaining reputation, the future she thought she'd secured, was gone. Sophia's name was cleared publicly, with the same news outlets that had once printed cruel headlines about her now running quiet corrections, though as often happens in this world, the apology never reached quite as many people as the original accusation had. Still, it was enough. Detective Marsh personally apologized to her, admitting he should have looked harder before assuming the simplest answer was the correct one. Her mother back in Georgia cried on the phone again, but this time from relief, telling Sophia how proud she was, how she'd never once truly doubted her daughter's heart, no matter how frightening those weeks had been. Eleanor Cole recovered slowly but fully over the following months, her heart healing alongside the rest of her family. She insisted, the very week she returned home, that Sophia be reinstated immediately, with a raise she said was long overdue, and an apology of her own for not speaking up sooner about the strange feeling she'd always carried about Victoria. "I should have trusted my instincts months ago," Eleanor told Sophia one afternoon, sitting together in the garden, sunlight warming both their faces. "Sometimes the people who serve us quietly are the ones who deserve our trust the most. And sometimes the people who perform love the loudest are hiding something underneath it." As for Damien and Sophia, their story didn't rush into anything dramatic or sudden. There was too much healing to do first, too much trust to rebuild after everything that had happened. But slowly, over the following year, quiet mornings turned into quiet conversations, and quiet conversations turned into something neither of them had expected to find in a house that had once felt so cold and complicated. Damien learned to see Sophia not as the maid, but as a woman with her own dreams, her own family depending on her, her own quiet strength that had carried her through one of the most unjust periods of her life, without ever once losing her integrity. And Sophia learned, finally, that being seen wasn't something to fear, that the invisibility she'd once thought kept her safe had only kept her small, and that the people who truly cared about her, Eleanor and eventually Damien, valued her exactly as she was, not despite where she came from, but because of the strength that had taken her to get there. If there's one thing this story teaches us, it's this. The truth doesn't always announce itself loudly, and it doesn't always arrive quickly. Sometimes it hides quietly for weeks, while the innocent suffer and the guilty perform their grief in front of an audience. But truth has a way of finding the light eventually, especially when someone cares enough to keep asking questions instead of accepting the easiest answer. Never let the confidence of an accusation convince you it's the truth. And never assume that the quietest person in the room has the least to offer. Thank you so much for staying with me through this one, friends. If this story moved you, if you found yourself hoping for Sophia the whole way through, give this video a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments what you would have done in her place. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that justice, even when it's slow, still finds its way home. I'll see you in the next story.